Welcome back, guests, and welcome back, Geoff. You're
Yeah,
back from your European travels.
I am. It was a great time we had in London and Edinburgh and Paris. So
Hmm.
lots of chance to compare notes with those cities and Vancouver. And I'm not going to comment on how Vancouver fared in some of those comparisons, but
You've
theater
resigned
scene's better
yourself
in
yet
Edinburgh. I'll
again.
tell you that.
You've resigned yourself yet again to living in a colonial backwater.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's amazing what's going on over there. It's very hard to follow the politics in the UK. And one thing I noticed is very striking is there are no newspapers on the street. You have to hunt them down. Whereas
Really?
in the past, in many years past, when I went to the UK, papers were everywhere. There'd be two or three
Hmm.
newsstands in a row, and they'd all be shouting at you, and there'd be placards in front of each one explaining the headlines, which are often hilarious and completely misleading. But there was a big political crisis while we were there, and Angela Rayner, the deputy to the prime minister, had to resign, and a complete cabinet shuffle occurred right afterwards. And then the next day, a massive demonstration in support of Palestine, where what seems to be a pretty innocuous organization has been proscribed as a terrorist organization, Palestine Action. And
Hmm.
so we saw people on the bus wearing T-shirts that said Plasticine Action, which had been a spoof that led to several arrests to the embarrassment of the police. Anyway, every, uh,
Maybe it's the
everything's
Labor
still going.
government that's got rid of all the newspapers because they're deeply unpopular right now.
Well, I don't. I think it's across the board on popularity. Nigel
Yeah,
Farage, the reform
yeah,
guy there,
yeah.
traces his success back to the ideas of Preston Manning.
Yeah.
So lots going on. Yeah,
We'll have
very
to have
turbulent
our
time.
we'll have to have our old friend Andrew Percy come back on the show and tell us about UK politics. Well, before we get to our guest today, in the strategy suite, Geoff and I will chew on more than a few topics today. It's a busy, busy
Busy
week.
day. Busy day.
A mining mega merger. Mr.
Hmm.
Eby goes to Ottawa soon. BCGEU workers heading to the picket lines, and
They're already
lawyer.
there.
Yeah,
More
well,
picket
they're already
lines.
there. That's right.
Yeah.
And lawyers getting busy on the Cowichan decision. So we'll get to that. And I should also note that it'll just be the two of us today, and Kate will circle back in due course. But first, our guest. Um, getting Don Wright booked for a return visit to Hotel Pacifico was a blindingly obvious decision. As many of you know, that is the name of his substack. He's a triple threat, a public servant, a university president, and a forestry executive in his career background. And while he's retired from leading the public service, he hasn't retired from his keyboard. In fact, some of his takes are pretty spicy. Here's some of the recent columns he's written. Canada's Boulevard of Broken Dreams. It sounds like a James Dean movie. How did Canada's seniors' promise turn into a Ponzi scheme? Hey, boomers, let's do the right thing. We can have our own values, but we can't have our own arithmetic. And energy illiteracy could kill us. So Don's got a lot to get off his chest, and I will also note that he's had fawning press coverage lately from the Vancouver Sun. Douglas Todd wrote, highly informed, retired, or semi-retired professionals like Don Wright are a godsend to the public. A godsend!
A godsend.
Don,
Right here
welcome.
on our
Thank you for
podcast.
blessing us here at Hotel Pacifico yet again.
It's my pleasure.
I didn't even mention that you're the Steve Martin of Hotel Pacifico, but there you go. I'll let people of a certain age understand that reference. Um, well, let's break down some of your hot takes, your recent hot takes. I'm just going to summarize one of them from your Substack on arithmetic. You have a prescription for restarting the progress machine, getting a tighter labor market, um, focusing on industries that actually help grow the economy, um, paying attention to Canada's gravity problem. I'm going to let you explain that, but ensuring that public investments are creating a higher standard of living on an ongoing basis, and recognizing that housing affordability requires policymakers to pay attention to demand as well as supply. So there's a lot to unpack there, Don, but tell us like your worldview. What's on your mind here?
Well, I mean, I guess one of the things that's been great about being semi-retired is I am now free to speak my mind. Not that I ever felt stifled or anything, but as a public servant in particular, your job is to inform the politicians. It's not to actually get out in public and make cases for any particular policy or whatever. And now, since I'm retired, I have the opportunity to just take a look at things. And the thing that really concerns me is that I do think the progress machine in Canada has kind of broken down. And when I say progress machine, basically an economy that generates year over year steady increases in real wages, wages correcting for inflation. And I think that is really upstream of all the progress that you want to accomplish in our society, because if you don't have a prosperous, broad middle class, you're not going to have the tax revenue, you're not going to have the political support for doing all of the other good stuff. So that's my primary focus. And I come at it from a different number of angles that I just think public policy, mostly at the national level, and I want to make that clear, has really missed the mark for the last number of years.
Well, Don, you and I had a chance to talk about this quite a bit when we worked together with John Horgan, but what do you say to British Columbians who see, a decline in the forest sector, which we can debate the reasons for, but the reality of it is obvious, and increasing difficulties in extracting resources? Maybe natural gas is the exception. Can a productive economy be different than the one that got us here? And if it was going to be different, what would it look like, do you think, in the BC context?
Well, a couple of points to make there. I mean, our economies always evolve, and they always will. The dynamics of particular industries change over time. But I would differentiate between things that occur not because of government policy. The beetle, for example, led to a significant decline in the harvestable timber for the foreseeable future, and that was going to lead to a decline in the interior forest industry. The softwood lumber fight with the Americans has always put some challenges in front of the industry. But I would differentiate that from things that do involve public policy. So land use decisions, planning processes, the way the government goes about reconciliation with Indigenous First Nations. And I think the impulses that we've been following in this province over the last few decades have been broadly correct, but I think there's some room for changes at the margin. Outside of the resource-based industries, I think people would be surprised to know that there's actually a pretty significant non-resource-based manufacturing sector, primarily in the Lower Mainland, and I think we should be trying to help that do as well as possible. And then in terms of the new economy or the high tech, or however you want to portray it, I think the thing we need to focus on is how do we keep these startups rooted in British Columbia. I mean, BC is a great scene for startups. We have all kinds of startups in really interesting areas, but in my opinion, too many of them get to a certain stage and their decision is we either scale up in BC or we sell out to an American big tech company, and we haven't quite figured out how to avoid more of the latter happening. So I think those are all things we need to look at doing.
Mm-hmm. Don, you've written in the past, and I think we've talked about it previously with you, about how you calculate what the net benefit for a certain type of job is to British Columbia based on how much we spend per person on government services versus how much a job brings into the economy. And you've calculated that oil and gas job, has a net benefit of $35,000 per job, forestry $33,000, mining $15,000. But some other industries like film are actually net drains because of all the subsidies.
Now, you're really poking the bear early in the podcast.
Yeah, well, why not, eh? But I'm just connecting this to the drumbeat right now from both provincial and federal governments for major projects mainly focused around natural resources. Your math, your arithmetic would seem to indicate that expediting and getting some of these major projects into being would be a fast way to jumpstart the progress machine.
Well, in general, yes. But we need to continue to do the calculus. Like an endless expansion of oil production in Alberta is not necessarily going to generate the same per job benefits that we saw from the first 4 million barrels a day or whatever it's going to be. So I think you always have to do the calculus at the margins. Similarly, in BC right now, the government is pursuing some mining projects, and I think that's the right thing to do. But in any particular project, you need to do the math and make sure that on net, it's a benefit to the BC economy. So I think you just, those calculations that you talked about were just an example of the type of analysis I think government should be doing when they start choosing different industries to either promote or to restrain.
Yes, after a few false starts and a few decades of slow progress, AI is officially taking off and changing our lives. And presenting sponsor Telus is embracing the future by integrating cutting-edge technologies like AI to unlock opportunities here in BC and beyond. Telus is pioneering the use of AI to drive innovation and economic growth, both domestically and internationally, through innovations such as Telus's Fuel iX platform, an internal company-wide AI platform that boosts employee productivity. On average, the platform saves employees 40 minutes or more per task, all while enabling collaboration and protecting privacy. Tasks like SEO research, document development, project planning, data analysis, and coding are all now completed in a fraction of the time. And Fuel iX co-pilots are now widely available to other enterprise companies. Another example was shared at the 2025 UN AI for Good Summit, where Telus hosted a workshop titled Crafting Ethical AI with Indigenous Intelligence, Partnering with Indigenous Peoples for Innovative Solutions. The session explored how Telus has been working alongside Pipiquan Pitaquan, an Indigenous-owned, led, and majority-staffed public relations agency, to bring Indigenous values and worldviews into AI development. It also explored how two-way learning, combining Western innovation with Indigenous knowledge, can lead to more ethical and inclusive technologies. When it comes to new technology, Telus are leaders, proving that technological advancements can be achieved ethically and demonstrating how Telus is always building Canada.
But Don, your latest piece was really about energy illiteracy. And what I took that to mean was really that people are unaware of how critical the use of fossil fuels was to the creation of the modern economy, that in almost all of economic growth in the last number of millennia occurred in the last 150 years, partly due to fossil fuels. But we're also in a period where we know that there's carbon emissions and they're harmful and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Taking a look at BC, and you were, had your hands on the levers when we were doing Site C. There was a big discussion at that time that continues about connecting that power to the northwest, where there's all these mining opportunities that require a lot of load, but also continuing concern about climate change and huge cost to our economy from flooding and that kind of thing. How do you strike the balance there? What do you do in that case? And I want to throw one more thing into the mix to get your reaction, because it's current federally too. Could we not cap emissions from fossil fuel production and get increased productivity? We were doing that for a period of time. We saw emissions level out while the economy continued to grow. Is there any hope there, or do we have to just throw all of the emission concerns overboard and go for the energy development?
Yeah, well, I certainly am not an advocate of throwing the emission concerns overboard. But I make a few points. First of all, we should be paying attention to what are the most cost-effective ways to reduce emissions. The federal government's climate change policy is quite all over the map. They've got regulations of this, and they had a carbon tax on the consumers and a industrial carbon price, and subsidies in these areas and subsidies in that area. And I I'd be astonished if somebody could show me that that was the most cost-efficient way to achieve any particular emissions reduction. True confessions, I've been an advocate of the carbon tax. Even before Gordon Campbell started it out here, a colleague of mine and I did an op-ed in the Vancouver Sun advocating for the carbon tax. And
so it's your fault.
it's my fault. Bruce and I had a good laugh because this was my first experience in not reading the comments. And somebody described the two of us as ass clowns for this suggestion. And I actually was sad with how the federal government basically squandered the carbon tax as a tool. That's water under the bridge right now. But the other thing that I think is important is, we need to get emissions down, and we need to do that in the most cost-effective way as possible. But we also have to pay attention to what's going on in the rest of the world. And, there is a cost to reducing emissions. And I think Canada needs to be careful that it doesn't try to get too far ahead of the rest of the world, because that will result, among other things, is just economic activity going elsewhere. So there's always a balancing act that you need to pay attention to.
Can we just stay on fossil fuels for a minute? Because in many parts of society, we tax producers, manufacturers who lead to pollution. So we all have to pay an environmental fee when we buy a tire or something like that. But we don't seem to treat the oil and gas producers the same way when they leak methane from their wellheads or refuse to clean up shut-in wells. Is there any room for that, or do we face the same problem that we just can't drive up the costs, or we shoot ourselves in the foot?
Well, I guess I would disagree with you in that we just let them do that. And as you know, a key part of the Clean BC program were much tighter methane regulations. And I think we were targeting to reduce them by 75% over time. And I think that is a perfectly defensible thing to do. But it still comes back to paying attention to what the cost at the margin is of reducing emissions. And I think that's the right thing to do.
I just want to switch gears to your views on Canada's immigration policy, which I think ties into a lot of your critiques of how we've used public policy to work against our own interests. To quote you, 10 years of Trudeau's immigration policy has weakened workers' bargaining power, stifled innovation, harder to get youth summer employment, weakened GDP growth, and put fuel on the housing crisis fire. Well, that's quite a list. So basically, we saw sharply increase immigration numbers over the past decade. You obviously see considerable downsides in that approach. Over to you, Don. What do you think we need to do going forward here?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a bit of a rambling answer to that. But if you go back in time before 2016, there was a broad consensus in Canada that healthy levels of immigration were good. Broad public support for it. We felt good about it. We appreciated the diversity element that was brought in, and things were good. And then the Trudeau administration, I think, influenced by things like the Century Initiative. And I know some people say, "Oh, you're talking conspiracy theory here," but they did advocate for a significant increase in the rate of immigration levels. And the Trudeau administration adopted that. And then, to be blunt, there just was gross incompetence. It comes, I like that phrase of Talleyrand's, it's worse than a crime, it's a blunder. And they just lost control of the system. So, round numbers, before 2015, the level of net immigration between new permanent residents and non-permanent residents was in the neighborhood of 250,000 a year. In 2022, it was 1.3 million. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that's going to cause real problems. And I remember writing an op-ed in early 2003, just after Premier Eby took over, and it was the title was something like, "Will Justin Trudeau make it impossible for David Eby to be successful?" At that point in time, I think something like 150,000 new people a year were coming into the Lower Mainland. Well, that's just going to cause all kinds of stress on housing markets, on the healthcare system, on labor markets, and it just wasn't a good thing. So
you know something about post-secondary education,
yeah,
and we used, rightly or wrongly, we
yeah,
used the high fees from foreign
yeah,
students to pay for a lot of our
sure, yeah.
post-secondary education. Was that a mistake, or is there a balance that we should strike there?
Well, I don't think it was a mistake, and kind of truth in advertising here. In 2012, I think it was, I sat on a task force that Jim Flaherty had set up on international education. The president of the University of Western Ontario and some other CEOs of post-secondary institutions were on that task force, and we recommended that the government should set out to double the number of international students, and also provide pathways to permanent resident status for those that wanted to stay on. And I still think that was the right recommendation. If we are going to have healthy levels of immigration, I think the surest way of identifying people that are going to do well and integrate well into our social and economic societies will be post-secondary students who come here. They obviously will have had to have had English language or French language competencies. They'll get a sense of what the social mores are in this country. They'll develop networks. They're more likely to be successful than somebody that comes in, say, at the age of 30, that has academic credentials from their home country. And we all know the challenges that entails in terms of getting recognition, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think the policy of international education was wrong. But again, I think the federal government just really took their eye off the ball. And in particular, in 22, I think it was, Sean Fraser eliminated the restriction on how many hours a week international students could work. Prior to that, I think it was they could only work 20 hours a week, and he took that off. Well, to be blunt, what you're telling unscrupulous private sector colleges to do is forget about the education business, just go out and sell work permits to people. And it really got out of control. So I just think it's a question of, let's properly design our systems. Let's pay attention to the numbers and get it right.
What's the deal with cold plunges? They're pretty popular right now. I don't get it. They're trendy, invigorating, and apparently they build resilience. Who knew that taking cold showers to save money on heating would turn into a wellness craze? Luckily, for me, saving energy doesn't mean giving up hot showers. Across BC, thousands of people made their homes and businesses more efficient last year, and it was all possible thanks to our sponsor, FortisBC. And the impact? Pretty impressive. In 2024 alone, with the help of rebates, FortisBC customers managed to cut their gas and electricity use enough to lower emissions by almost 1 million tons. How did that happen? Through insulation upgrades, energy-efficient heating and cooling systems, and money-saving rebates. Even local producers got in on it. Canoe Forest Products in Salmon Arm is just one example. They manufacture plywood, a key material for retrofits and new builds, and are slashing energy use while boosting business. So go ahead and leave the cold plunges to the spas. Check out the rebates at fortisbc.com/rebates. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast. So you're, I think, connecting the massive increase in immigration over the last decade to, I think you call it a Ponzi scheme. Maybe I'm getting the Ponzi schemes mixed up, but basically the impact on the housing market, and that there's an issue of generational fairness where the younger potential first-time home buyers have kind of been screwed by the immigration numbers. Am I characterizing that right in terms of your critique on that?
What I meant by the Ponzi scheme, it goes back to this notion that proponents of significantly higher immigration levels make that we can solve our aging problem by dramatically increasing immigration levels.
Right.
And it sounds superficially plausible because the age distribution of immigrants tends to skew to that 20 to 39-year-old age group. And so, on the face of it, if we're bringing in more people at that age, then it's going to help us with the aging problem. But you actually have to look at how that evolves over the next 25, 50 years. And the sad reality is that immigrants age too. And so they may come in at the age of 30, but 35 years down the road, they're now going to be at the 65 retirement age and all of that. So that was what I was getting at, is higher immigration levels are not a solution to our aging problem. We have to look elsewhere for the solution to the aging problem. But having said that, yeah, there is some real collateral damage to younger Canadians, because that 20 to 39-year-old period of life, that's when you get your start in your career. So you're going to end up competing with much larger numbers of competitors in that labor market. You also want to get your foot on the housing ladder, and you're competing with more people in that. And so that's where I'm saying there's been a real intergenerational inequity that's falling on younger Canadians.
So do you think, now that the immigration dial has been turned back a bit, international students has been dialed back, we have policy levers on banning foreign ownership of residences, we've got the vacancy tax, do you think that all those things have now led to the market really being fairly stagnant right now, at least in Vancouver and Toronto, I think, in terms of rents are down, sales are flat, prices are, I think, flat. Do you think that was a result of all these levers, or?
Yeah, I think it was, and I think we need to talk about that. I had one Substack where I poked a little bit of fun at Gregor Robertson, because he said we don't want the price of houses to go down, but we want to build more affordable houses, and it's hard to see how you square the circle on that one. The policymakers allowed a real dilemma to emerge here. So they have let the price of housing really accelerate, and most of that actually gets capitalized into land values. And you have developers who bought parcels of land at those very inflated prices, and now as the demand falls off, when they pencil out their projects, they can't make the numbers work anymore. So I think we just have to accept that there needs to be a re-equilibration of things, and
not to mention thousands of first-time or otherwise home buyers that bought at the higher end of the market and maybe underwater on their mortgages.
Yeah. So it's my advice, for what it's worth, is let's try to have a glide down to more affordable housing, as opposed to this, what we seem to be going through right now, which is the cold shower, which could have all kinds of unhappy impacts on people.
But Don, don't you think there's an issue here in terms of supply, where we've accepted the developers' demands to take off every possible regulation, reduce every permitting charge, basically make it as easy as possible for them to develop it in a deregulated way in a lot of respects. You see a lot of blowback now in Vancouver from people thinking that without, and these are not people who I would put in a very left-wing camp who are going, hey, I don't mind density, but didn't expect a 30-story tower in my backyard. I mean, just to get back to the victims here a bit, I think that we have different types of people who are, say, have been in the market for a long time and have had a windfall. Maybe I'm in that category because I bought low and it kept on growing. My kids are in a different category altogether. They're having to buy at the peak, and their incomes have not grown as fast as those land values increased. So there's going to be different types of haircuts taken here, and some of that's going to be necessary, right? I mean, what kind of strategies should Gregor Robertson do to bring in some housing that would not crater, real estate values, but be more acceptable? I mean, more rental seems to be one, co-op and other kinds of subsidies. Have you seen them say anything from Ottawa yet that would give you heart?
Well, not a lot, but that's that's a little bit unfair because I still think they're trying to figure things out. There has been an incredible amount of rental housing built over the last few years. Through the CMHC, they had a program, and that really has promoted a lot of rental housing, and you've already seen rents come down, and I think there's more of that to come. What would be my prescription? My prescription would be let's equilibrate immigration levels. Let's take the time to absorb this excess that happened over that basically 21, 2023 period. And then I would just kind of hope that we could see prices glide down till they're affordable. I think an abrupt, like let's reduce the average housing price by 25%, then we get into the problem that Mike mentioned, that you had people that really had the fear of missing out in 22 when they stretched probably further than they should have to buy that house, and now they're facing a not happy situation. So I think gradualism and trying to glide back to affordable levels is the way to go. But
do you make distinctions in the range of programs? I think you do, but I mean, we say immigration, but we also are talking about a temporary foreign worker program, which has very different characteristics from a seasonal agricultural worker program. And I would argue that there's not a lot of young people who are ready to start putting their hopes and dreams aside to go and trim tomato plants in a Leamington greenhouse,
Yeah.
And the people who are coming to do that work are not looking to live in Canada. They're trying to make a quick cash earning so they can go back and maybe buy land in Mexico. So are we using too broad a brush here to tar all these programs?
Absolutely. And I hope I'm not coming across as tarring all the programs. The temporary foreign worker program for farm labor, there's probably going to always be a good rationale for that. Although, I think we still have to pay attention to the conditions that the farm workers work under and whether they have the protections, et cetera, et cetera. But, I'll be blunt. I do not see the argument for TFWs for Tim Hortons. Those arguments don't work for me.
That's part of the reason.
Say pay them more.
Yeah.
Well, and when you were in government, we raised the minimum wage and tied it to inflation.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen Tim Hortons go toes up as far as
you're now seeing a political convergence too, where Pierre Poilievre and David Eby are now saying the same thing on temporary foreign workers. So,
well, the Premier would insist that's not exactly the case, but we can talk about that later. Just one more thing, Don, because there has been a lot of interest here in Vancouver anyway, in getting jobs that were white collar coding jobs, really, in many respects, and skilled, well paid. So that was, I'm thinking of Amazon and Microsoft, many of which were key tenants for offices that were put in place before the pandemic. It's not clear how full they will ever be. But to my surprise, when I was on city council, a lot of those jobs were temporary foreign worker jobs as well. In other words, 3/4, as I recall, of the Microsoft initial tranche, which was to be 200 positions, were actually going to be filled offshore, and that was all part of the package. Are we going to run into heavy weather on this front as AI and other developments start to undermine this? And there's a big question mark even over how our office districts are going to survive in the face of remote working and so on. What can we do about any of that?
Well, I mean, that's a big question. In terms of what the impact of AI are going to be, I think Bill Gates had a saying that every new technology, its impact is exaggerated in the short run, but underestimated in the long run. But there's no doubt that AI is going to fundamentally, disrupt things.
I think it's going to reduce pressure on the film tax credit. I shouldn't laugh. Anybody out there in the film industry knows that it's a real problem.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, every time there has been a new disruptive technology, people have been concerned about the loss of jobs, as they should be. But in the long run, it generates more jobs, it generates more wealth, and that's how society progresses. The key is governments shaping labor markets so that the benefits of that don't all accrue to, the capitalists, to speak in class terms. And that this comes back to one of my primary concerns is how is the government thinking about the labor market, and are they ensuring a level of tightness there so that employers are obliged to increase wages for workers over the longer run?
Okay. Well, wild-eyed radical. So in the time we have left, I just want to touch on a couple other topics. In the last week or two, one of your predecessors as head of the public service in British Columbia, Ken Dobell, passed away. And he's someone I cross paths with at the city of Vancouver when I was a young assistant. He was the city manager, and then when I was in the Premier's office in Victoria, he was the head of the public service. And he was always a giant of a man in many ways, but a giant intellectually, and his ability to process policy and move it through the system. Don, you worked with him as a deputy minister in Victoria too. What are your recollections of working with Ken?
Yeah, very fond recollections. I view Ken as a classic, good public servant. He, as you said, city manager in Vancouver, and then was prepared to come over and spend 4 years working with Gordon Campbell in 2001. And I did get the privilege of working with him. And he was a great boss to work for. When you had a meeting with him, he challenged you, and he, asked you questions that you might not have the right answers for, but he really forced you to think through things and make sure that you've actually know as much as you think you know. On the other hand, his manner was a little bit gruff, but when you got into a little bit of a challenge, which deputy ministers always do, he would support you and help you work through it. And I guess the other memory I have of him is he had two offices. He had his regular office, and then he had his outside office. And you'd often go over there, and he'd say, "Okay, let's go to my outside office." Now that was the breezeway between the West Annex and the main building, because he smoked.
Oh yeah.
And so you'd be sitting in this breezeway. Victoria's not Saskatchewan, but it's not always pleasant in January. Well, Ken would have a cigarette, smoke, and keep peppering you with questions. So, yeah, it was it was a loss when I heard that he had passed away.
Yeah, well, there's no blurry line in terms of Ken was public service, and sometimes the line between public service and the political side can get a little blurry, but he, he, was very clearly, he had a focus, and the political side was very different, and, it all connected through Gordon.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he definitely, left his time in public service with a very high reputation, and sorry to see him passing. Finally, Don,
Well, just
you're
before we
the,
move on,
oh, sure.
Mike, I just
Sorry, Geoff.
follow up on that front. Don, I know your views about the public service, and I share them, but we've talked about a range of very broad topics today, some of which are not really directly within the province's mandate. And do you worry that there's not enough opportunity for the public service to get exposed to these debates and some of the new thinking that's occurring on these fronts, or is it okay? I mean, you look at someone like Ken Dobell, and he's from a different generation, you know, of leadership and background and experience. Is there enough of the uh, exposure of the public service to some of these challenges and issues that are facing us now that really aren't really directly the province's job?
Yeah. I don't know I can give you a good answer to that, Geoff. I mean, one of the things I did promise myself when I retired was I wasn't going to loom around like the ghost of Banquo and haunt my successors. So I've not paid a lot of attention to the dynamics within the public service, but I hope they are getting exposed to this type of debate, and I would certainly I tried to do that when I was there, and I would think that my successors try to do it as well too. But I honestly can't pass judgment on it.
Fair enough. Yeah.
One last thing, Don. I know you're the chair of ALS Action Canada, and have been working on that for a few years. Thought I'd give you a chance just to give a quick update on what's on your agenda there.
Yeah, thanks very much. And just for those of your listeners that aren't aware, about 4 years ago, I agreed to sit on the board of something called ALS Action Canada, which is started by 7 people that had just been diagnosed with ALS. And when they realized that the healthcare system couldn't do much for them, they got angry, as I would too in that circumstance, but they decided to try to do something about it. So they set up this little patient-led, patient voice for lobbying. Well, actually, we're not allowed to say lobbying, advocating for more research into solutions, greater access to clinical trials, and faster approval of new treatments. And it's been a really rewarding experience for me. Heartbreaking, when since I've been on the board, 7 of our directors have passed away. And Mike, as you know, it's very cruel.
Yeah.
They get robbed of their faculties at a visibly apparent rate. But we are raising money and funding good causes, and it's really been a privilege to be part of watching these people that took the worst hand that life could have dealt them and said, well, I'm going to do my very best to make sure that down the road other people won't suffer the same hopeless fate that I suffer. And probably should mention that 3 weeks ago we lost one of our real warriors, Mark Curtin, and I really appreciate your having had a toast to him, Mike. But he was an amazing guy, and just an example of somebody who would not be defeated by getting this type of hand dealt to him.
Yeah, I mean, there's some amazing champions who were, as you say, patient-led advocacy. Mark being one of them. I think back to Greg Gow, who was a legislative intern in Victoria, a few decades ago, but he was struck down by ALS. But before he passed, he was relentless in terms of advocating for patients, and became known to many MLAs for his, his determined nature, and he made a huge difference. So a lot of other stories like that. So thank you for your service on that, Don.
Yeah. No, thank you.
And thank you for joining us today at Hotel Pacifico. Check out Don's Substack, Blindingly Obvious. for his hot, spicy takes on public policy, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more from Don in the future. Thanks, Don.
It's often not blindingly obvious till you read the blog, Don. Just FYI.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Sometimes it's not blindingly obvious till you read your entire blog item. So it's revelatory many times.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
It is, yeah, the blindiness effect may happen towards the latter part of the argument. Please be patient.
Cherished taboos are sacrificed very gingerly. Yeah.
Anyways,
Thanks, Don.
Good fun. Thanks for the invitation. Always enjoy it.
BC's public services are stretched right now. Maybe you've noticed. We care about the work we do, but the high cost of living means that wildfire fighters like me can barely make ends meet. I worry about our most experienced crew members leaving in a time of increasingly dangerous wildfires. If we want to get public services back on track, BC needs to invest in frontline workers.
A message from members of the BC General Employees Union, BCGEU.
Well, we're here in the strategy suite, just me and Geoff, just chewing things over. Hey,
Yeah.
Geoff, I noticed this Angus Reid poll came out yesterday on the premiers, the quarterly approval ratings for the premiers. Angus Reid says, or is it Shawchi? I'm not sure. Eby's approval rating down to 41%. It was 46 in June, 53 in March. That was when he was having a little spurt in the elbows up era.
Mm-hmm.
But one little tidbit here is those who strongly approve of Premier Eby's performance is 9%. It was 12 in June, 17 in March. Whereas in Alberta, across the Rockies, 24% strongly approve of Danielle Smith. So she has a little fired up base within the UCP. There's a lot of people who don't like her too. But here in BC, there's kind of like general approval. It's still 41's pretty good still. There's general, it's a bit soft though, right? Like it's 9%'s not a lot. Like it's not a super fired up base of people
considering how
saying,
tight
great
the,
job.
Considering how tight the election result was, I think the Premier's approval ratings have been remarkably resilient, and
They have
there's
been,
been
yeah.
a lot of bad news. And so I'm not that surprised. I'm sorry for his sake that he's down a bit. Of course, you've got Wob Canoe there at some other number, which is in the next universe.
Yeah.
No, the Premier's been struggling with a lot of issues, and it doesn't look like the fall's going to be kinder to him than the spring was, especially based on his first scrum, which for those who don't follow us closely, maybe as you and I did, he came to an event in Surrey, I think, about opening schools. So the big issue in Surrey, but no one asked him about that, or if they did, no one reported it. He made some other comments on 2 or 3 issues that have all had sort of follow-on commentary and controversy. One was he was critical of the temporary foreign workers program and said it should be wound up or dramatically overhauled, and basically said it's the reason why we see a lot of people who are temporary foreign workers in food banks. And
I was surprised by that.
yeah, and so were a lot of people, and he's been criticized harshly for those comments. Although I noticed when I checked out the response on Twitter, or sorry, X, I didn't see any critical responses. I think there's a lot of people who are applauding what they see as an anti-immigration position from him. But that's precisely why some people in the NDP are unhappy with him, and some important people actually are unhappy with those comments. He made a comment also about reconciliation and the appeal that's been launched for the Cowichan case, and said he wants the judges to look in the eyes of real people and mortgage holders. And yesterday, the First Nations Leadership Council condemned that comment and demanded he retract it because Indigenous people seeking their rights are real people too. Suddenly I'm at a loss for the third one, but there was a third comment he made on yet another topic, which also attracted.
Okay, hold that thought because we'll circle back to Eby.
Yeah.
And the other thing I just wanted to acknowledge, since you're just back, and there's been a bit of previews of the John Horgan biography, autobiography, really,
Right.
that is soon to be released. Von Palmer had a few columns on it, and we're going to have what do you call Rod Mickleborough,
Well, he
co-author or
was
the
the author,
editor or
and he was the co-author because it was an
yeah,
As Told To project where John
right.
Horgan gave extensive interviews to
So you kind
Rod,
of
who
pulled that
then,
together. So
who then,
we're gonna get into that in a few weeks. So just put in a
yeah,
pin in that for people,
right.
and talk about the posthumous release of that. Okay, let's get into Strategy Suite. Mining mega merger. Big news in the last 24 hours here. I wasn't sure which way this was going to go when I first heard it reported that mining superpower Anglo American was going to swallow Teck Resources. But by the morning, it appeared that this is not a swallowing, but a merger that, in fact, will lead to Anglo or Teck Anglo, as it would be called if approved, would be headquartered in Vancouver,
Hmm.
which would make it one of the largest mining companies in the world, based here. It would also be, so says Teck, the largest private sector headquarters ever to be based in British Columbia. So that's kind of interesting news. What's your hot take?
Well, I think that the tech story is critical to BC's economy and to some really important regions in the province. So it's always more important than uh, some other mining deals because of the sensitivity of the issues. But we just saw a couple of years ago Glencore take over the legacy coal assets of Teck, but Teck
Yeah,
retained copper at the huge Highland Valley mine, which is going to get a big extension.
yeah.
And as part of the government's critical mineral strategy, Teck is a very big deal, and it's crucial that we continue
And
to
zinc,
have
yeah.
some of these large companies headquartered here. So I have to admit, my heart sank a bit when I saw that the Anglo
Mm.
proposal had been made because I thought perhaps, and I think it's still a risk that the messaging is all very positive right now, but eventually we'll see tech disappear as a brand, and perhaps even the
Well,
focus
this,
on
well, they
BC.
say they're going to call it Teck Anglo,
Hmm.
and so the
Well, tech
brand,
has some very big assets in Chile, which apparently are closely
yeah,
aligned with some of the Anglo
yeah, their next,
assets
yeah.
as well.
Apparently, they can have some synergy with the mine in Chile. The other thing which they made pains to point out is that the CEO of Teck Anglo, who's currently the CEO of Anglo American, would have his principal residence in Vancouver, and it's an interesting thing to point out
Mhm.
because I think they're trying to make the case that this is actually going to happen, and because they need federal approval for this merger. So, I mean, a couple of years ago when Glencore made a hostile takeover for Teck, there were a lot of concerns about Vancouver losing the headquarters. There was a lot of business commentary about that, um, about what that would do to the ecosystem here in Vancouver. So I guess we'll see how it plays out. But right now, the political reaction to the merger seems pretty positive.
Well, I think so. And I think mining, we had sorry, I remember
Michael Goring,
Michael Goring on from the Mining
the
Association of
legendary
BC.
Michael Goring.
Mining is a much bigger deal than downtown British Columbia residents give it credit for in terms of its support to the economy, the revenues it produces for the Crown, the high paid jobs, and increasingly the importance of those minerals for emission reduction projects, batteries, and things like that. So if we're going to have an elbows up economy, then having uh, a strong mining sector with those kinds of desirable products is very important. Um, and it'll be interesting to see if that's realizable. I think the province's key and most tangible promise in terms of economic development right now is those mines. That's the biggest private sector investment, the northern critical mineral mines. And so changes like this could have an important dynamic, I think, in terms of the mining ministry, how it performs, how approvals get done. It's a very important story.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there. And if this merger goes through, it builds on what's already, I think, an underrated mining. Vancouver is an underrated mining center. And by that, I mean, I don't think British Columbia's really recognized how much mining exploration expertise exists in BC. Like,
Well, and it's based here and operates internationally.
yeah, I mean, they're
Yeah.
all around the office towers where I work. They're working in Africa, they're working in South America, and the new head of the Association of Mineral Exploration in BC, Todd, will leave no stone unturned. Um, we'll have to get out there busy prospecting with all these new suits coming into town. There might be a little more juice for mineral exploration too. Who knows? Okay, let's talk about Mr. Eby goes to Ottawa soon. This is a new movie being released where a tall, plucky premier from the West Coast goes to Ottawa to tell them what the deal is on the Pacific here. On September 18th, he will be speaking to the Canadian Club at a dinner in Ottawa to talk about BC's place in Canada, ostensibly. And he will be hosted by none other than David Hurley of the Hurley Burley, our sister pod. So David and David will have a conversation in front of the Mucky Mucks there in Ottawa. What do you think is BC's agenda going into that Ottawa trip, Geoff?
Well, I've been worried that the list that gets leaked and discussed of major projects has been very light on BC projects. And I think that the government has been saying that, but in a fairly muted way. The big change was the federal energy minister saying, I think yesterday, that he sees a lot of boxes being ticked, was his terminology, by the proposal for a hydro transmission line to the northwest to open up those mines. If that didn't come through on that list, I think the Eby government would be furious because they've made a big point of that. What Prime Minister Carney keeps talking about instead is another bitumen pipeline from Alberta, which is a real big problem for the government politically. It doesn't have a proponent right now, but I'm sure Danielle Smith, Premier of Alberta, will find one very quickly. And this is tricky and critical politics, so I think it makes a lot of sense for the Premier to go down there. And it's great that he's meeting with David Hurley, but more critically, he needs to meet with the Prime Minister and make sure that we don't get lost in the shuffle.
Well, I
Doug
assume he
Ford
will
was
be meeting with the
complaining
Prime
yesterday.
Minister. I'd hate to see him go all the way to Ottawa and be told that the Prime Minister's out on another 20K run.
Yeah,
Um,
but if you could take those meetings and you don't get a clear signal afterwards from the Prime Minister that
yeah,
he hears you, that's problematic. And there's no evidence so far that the provincial government's really been heard. It's a bit of a test for Gregor Robertson too, who's the BC minister. Of course, his portfolio is housing, but
yeah.
this should be BC's time to shine. And up till now, I haven't seen a lot of sunshine coming from Ottawa.
Well, this transmission line, which will go to Terrace, Prince George to Terrace, this is also would be electrifying LNG projects and in a quest to make them net zero, and then could be aimed north to the mining regions to provide them with some more juice. So that's I'm not altogether sure though what BC really needs from the federal government. Are they just going to ask for money? Because I think
Yep,
the
absolutely
approvals
ask for
are
money.
probably within the provincial realm to give.
Well, the policy context, you're right. I think that's a good point because what do you need? We need money. There's also the proposal for the cool Indigenous-led LNG pipeline project. That's another one. There's a few things there, but it hasn't been 100% clear what the provincial ask list is in terms of the real priorities. The one we hear the most about, though, is the transmission line, in my opinion. And the context has changed a lot in Ottawa. It's not really clear how much they care about emissions reductions. It's also not unclear how much capacity there is to allocate Site C power to these requirements, because the Site C power, while very large, is not infinite. And
Yeah.
if it's taken up on this project, there won't be a lot left for other purposes.
Well, Adrian's, his answer is probably like, well, that's why we're green lighting all these other renewable projects throughout
Yeah.
province. But I do think there's a discussion for another day on the reckoning over electricity rationing that we'll have to have, given that BC Hydro's annual report that was released last week highlighted the amount they're importing from the U.S. So,
Well, I think the
there's
Premier's got a contradiction here. I'd be interested in your reaction to this, because he keeps citing BC as the economic locomotive that will drag Canada out of the political crisis we face from Trump, but basically the economic engine.
Yeah.
That stretches credulity a little bit. I mean, the real economic engine at the moment is the oil sands, and Danielle Smith is proposing to dramatically increase their importance by adding a pipeline to Churchill, which the Prime Minister seems to be sympathetic to. Um, you know, what is the conversation going to be about the economic engine, and what is it actually going to be is a big question mark. And I think it's not clear to me what David Eby means when he says will be the economic engine. What precise activity are we going to undertake that we're not doing now that will make that difference?
Well, my advice, free advice worth what you paid for it, is lean in, man. Like it's the public wants the jobs. The
Mm-hmm.
public wants the growth. And you've got a huge deficit, and growing your way out of it is a lot better than cutting your way out of it. So, um, I think the polling will show that there's a pretty broad consensus in the general public for these projects. There may not be as much of a consensus within the NDP, right, for it. And that's obviously where the problem is. But outside of the NDP universe, there is. So we'll see. Now, talking about paying for public services, we've got a BCGEU strike and pickets happening everywhere. Geoff, I don't want to hold you up in this podcast because you're probably going to get down to the liquor store to get some
Yeah,
supplies for the next for the cold winter ahead in case
word to the wise, if you are someone who likes to imbibe, you may want to do a little bit of forward planning here, because the last time the BCGU went on strike, when I was working in the Premier's office, it was the liquor distribution branch where most of the action occurred for obvious reasons. The revenue available to the government goes down, so that's an economic impact on the government that's hard to replace, and no one can really argue that beer sales are a critical essential service like they might about wildfire fighting or something like that. So I think yeah, if you're
I guess
worried
we could
about
go to
having a certain
craft
bottle of
breweries.
wine,
We
better
could
go
go to
get it.
craft breweries and just go directly there and have our beer, can't we?
Yeah, this is well, but this we shouldn't laugh too much. This dispute could dominate the fall.
Yeah.
It's in quite a bad place. The BCGU has not actually sat across the table from government negotiators since July.
Hmm.
They have the province,
Whose
provincial
choice is
government.
that?
Pardon me.
Whose choice is that?
Well, it's not clear.
Yeah.
The costing that was released by the provincial government last week, which is quite an unusual maneuver. The government's twice done unusual things in bargaining with BCGU. They had a massive town hall meeting on Zoom or something with all the employees to try to explain what the government offer was. This was earlier in the summer. They now have put out another statement explaining where they think things stand. That's rejected by Paul Finch, who's president of the BC General Employees Union. He says that's the information is wrong, the costing is wrong. But the fundamental issue here appears to be the desire of the BCGEU to get a wage settlement that exceeds inflation. And both sides are debating about exactly what that means, but it has very significant consequences for the provincial budget. And just before the BCGEU announced its enormous strike mandate, which was in the high 90s with an 83% turnout, the government announced that it had a tentative agreement with the Hospital Employees Union in facilities bargaining, which includes a number of unions, including the BCGU in a minor way, which was within the current mandate. So the stage is set for a very big confrontation with the government saying, no, we've established what the settlement will be in general terms. We're still bargaining with the HEU and the others, but the GU saying, no, you haven't settled anything. We're here for a significantly higher amount of money than that. And it could have a multi-billion-dollar impact on the bottom line. If the GU is successful, there will be a Me Too effect across the entire public sector, meaning that everybody will get the same level of increase the GU did. And that's what the government wants to avoid at all costs. So a very interesting but very difficult confrontation shaping up in the next few weeks between the BCGU and the government.
Meanwhile, we're expecting the quarterly report to come out for the province's finances anytime this month.
Yeah.
And that will provide a glimpse on whether the fiscal situation has in fact been worsening or not. And if it does worsen considerably beyond what the budget was in February, I think that has to steel the resolve of government to hold the line on spending. So we'll see whether that throws a curveball into the discussion. But tough choices all around here.
I want to circle back briefly to the comments I made earlier about the Premier's statements at the Scrum, because the other thing he's facing this fall is an NDP convention, which is a
Yeah.
regularly scheduled thing, and a leadership review. And the comments that
Interesting.
he made, about the temporary foreign worker program and about reconciliation and about the BCGEU bargaining irritated people in each of those districts, in each of those issues areas, specifically in the NDP membership. So there will be a sort of, should we have a leadership review vote, yes or no? And in November at the convention, which is, I believe,
So
in
that's just the
Victoria.
delegates at convention who vote on that?
Yeah, but it's a bit of a free ride for people who want to send a message to the Premier, because they can vote that they think there should be a review and drive down the number that he's got. This was an issue when John
Yeah.
Horgan was there. He got of course, high 90s right away in 2017, but 2 years later it was down a number of points. People read a lot of it, too much
Yeah.
into that probably. So a difficult fall coming, I think, for the provincial government on a lot of fronts.
Well, we should have a Hotel Pacifico pool where we invite our listeners to guess what the leadership review number is for John Rustad and David Eby.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That could be almost as exciting as the P&E prize home lottery I watched on the news last night with Nikki Sharma reaching her hand into the big bucket of
Oh, the dream home. Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
boy,
Is it affordable?
5 minutes of Nikki Sharma on the news last night.
Is it
Boy,
affordable?
lucky her. It's in Langley. Is that affordable? I don't know.
I guess if you win it in the lottery, it's affordable.
Okay, one more quick topic. We'll just breeze through this, although this is actually going to have to be almost like a podcast series, the Cowichan decision. There's a lot going on here. Appeals are being filed right now. The BC government has some strong language that I think you referenced earlier is not rubbing First Nations leadership the right way. The mayor of Richmond is very concerned over what this means to fee simple land title in BC. The Musqueam are appealing based on what this does to their rights on the Fraser River. Expect more from the Tawasin. I just wanted to direct people's attention to a substack by Terry Glavin, who's a former Vancouver Sun and current National Post writer, I think, who had a lot of historical context on the Cowichan village over time and kind of the history of land rights. And Glavin's a very interesting writer, and you can't really peg him as he comes, I think, from what some would consider a left-wing perspective historically, but also very interesting
Very
takes.
contrarian in more
Very
recent years.
contrarian, yeah. So I always put a lot of stock into what he writes, and that's worth checking out. I mean, as are, frankly, a lot of the opinions. Like the legal opinions are quite fascinating, and this is a topic we're going to have to do proper justice to at some point because there's definitely it's not an issue that can be simplified into a simple black and white analysis.
Well, you remember before the days of podcasts, Mike, we had open line shows. Chaz Johal still has one, but Rafe Mayer was an open line host on CKNW, a former so-called cabinet minister, a lawyer, who did repeated lengthy discussions on his open line show about constitutional issues, including Indigenous rights and title and a host of other ones. And they were very, very popular. And I think that, unfortunately, a lot of media these days condescend a bit to their listeners, thinking they're not interested or able to understand this stuff. And that's not the case.
Well, I would expect we will hear a lot from Jazz on this. And I think Malcolm Brody was just on Jazz the other day. But there's another issue following in the heels of Cowichan too, which is, and we won't get into it today, but proposed changes to the Heritage Act. Vaughn Palmer's written about it just overnight. And this is the application of DRIPA, and it is raising concerns similar to what we saw a year and a half ago in the Land Act. So I feel like this package of First Nations-y stuff, court decisions, government policy. It's forming itself into a bit of a head of steam in terms of a public debate.
Yeah, and I think the key thing is that there has been a long-standing commitment that Aboriginal title and settlement, especially of claims, would not negatively impact fee simple land. But it's never been the case that there was no impacts on fee simple. And I'll tell a quick story from a UBCM convention that I attended when I was working in the Premier's office, approached by a family whose unmarked graves of their relatives they're unmarked but well known, were on private property. And after decades and decades of nothing happening, there was a sudden decision to do some development on that property. And the existing Heritage Act provided some protection for those human remains, and it wasn't being implemented in an urgent way by the local municipality. So these are real problems. They're not suddenly arising out of nowhere. They flow directly out of Canadian law, existing Canadian law, and Canadian and the rights that are extended to people under those circumstances. So yeah, it would be great to have a longer discussion, including with Geoff Plant, who has had a long history on this front from his days in the Campbell government to DRIPA.
Yeah, a lot of excellent resources out there. We'll have to put some thought into that. I will note from the kind of one point of view that's out there right now is our former Strategy Suite guest, Caroline Elliott's involved in a group called the Public Land Use Society, which is raising questions. That's just one voice out there. I think ranges the gamut from Stuart Phillip and the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, Assembly First Nations, individual legal opinions, experts like UVic Professor Hamar Foster. There's one can learn a lot by reading these perspectives, but at some point government will have to lead and provide very clear information so that a vacuum is not filled by fear and other things that don't exactly lead to more lightness. Anyways, I'm getting pretty thirsty, Geoff. Should we head to the
Yeah, I think we better. I got to raise a glass today to the RCMP and the Special Enforcement Unit and so on for their announcement yesterday that they have laid charges against 5 people, including 3 who were directly involved in the escape of Rabi Alkalil, one of Canada's most wanted criminals from Fraser Pretrial Center several years ago. He was charged with murder and later convicted in absentia for the Wall Center shootings, infamous targeted killing of some other gangsters in downtown Vancouver. So it was great to see success on that front. There are many questions that remain, though, about how the escape was possible and occurred. It seems to have impossible to my mind to assume there was no inside involvement. It was humiliating for the provincial corrections system that this guy got out just before he was to be sentenced for murder. The other thing that was a good news part of that story that the police announced yesterday was that in the course of investigating the breakout, they were able to stop a murder in Kamloops and charge people in connection with that crime that they stumbled on in the course of this investigation about the breakout. So some bad people out there, some 5 of them now in a better place. So good for the RCMP.
There you go. I'll raise a glass to Ken Dryden, who I think many people were very surprised to hear of his passing over the past weekend. Obviously, famous goaltender for Montreal Canadiens, but whose second act after politics was quite impressive, especially as a member of Parliament, but also as an advocate for player safety in hockey. Pardon me. I've read a number of his books, the famous one being The Game, which was probably the all-time classic about the game of hockey that all Canadians, or most Canadians, consider the national sport. But he wrote a book called The Moved and the Shaken, which doesn't get a lot of attention, but it's a book where he spent time moving in with a regular family in Ontario. I think the father worked at Esso, and he wrote a book about what it's like to be the regular family in Canada. And here's a guy who was famous from a young age and had this curiosity to tell the story of what it's like to be regular family in middle class Canada. And I think that spoke a lot to his empathy and seeking to understand the whole fabric of Canadian society. I think his voice on a number of issues will be missed, and I was sorry to see him pass away. Well, that's a wrap for
Agreed.
this week, Geoff. A lot going on in BC politics. A lot will be going on the next few weeks, especially as UBCM nears and September 22nd to 26th in Victoria, and then the legislative session kicks off in October. So you and I will be especially busy tracking all those things. Thank you this week, though, to Don Wright for checking in again, and to our presenting sponsor, Telus and Fortis BC and the BCGEU. See you next week, BC. You can never leave.